your tireless service and support over this long, yet potentially perilous year. Before I head into a recap of that year, I wanted to start with some celebratory information about this May's graduation. I attended 9 graduation ceremonies in College Station, which consisted of 8,903 undergraduate degrees and 3,497 graduate degrees. The student speeches were spectacular at all of the graduation ceremonies and demonstrated the strength and excellence of character of our graduating students. I also see many of our colleagues from our other campuses here, and I am sure they had similar experiences at the other campuses that we have across Texas, as well as on the other side of the ocean. So thank you for that. I see you. My year as faculty Senate Speaker started harmlessly enough last May when the year of the Path Forward seemed to have somehow merged 3 colleges, created new schools, moved departments, and had an enormity of other changes without the chaos that many of us expected. Removal of the tenure of libraries was a terrible shock and hurt to everybody. But by May, all the librarians who wanted to find a home had found a home in another department. Dr. Heather Lynch had already reached out to all of them and found that practically all of them were happy and well situated in their new department. The other librarians were making great strides in advancing the library in their new roles as staff members. It was in that moment in May that I laughed at my hubris, thinking that this was going to be a difficult year for the faculty, and wondered if I was needed at all as speaker for this coming year. I figured I would be twiddling my thumbs for the next year and was incredibly proud of how well Dale Rice had gotten us through what I thought would have been gone down as in history as one of the hardest 2 years in A&M history. I asked him to be my official mentor during the next year as I had little experience, and he graciously agreed. It is at this point that I'd like to give you all the story of how I ended up becoming Speaker of the Faculty Senate in the first place. In the fall of 2019, I was a full tenured professor in computer science and engineering, with full having been granted a good 5 years before. I had a thriving research group publishing over under 10 journal and prestigious conference papers a year, had over $10 million in research funding, with 5 more NSF grants to be awarded within the next few months. But I felt like something was missing. I wanted to be doing more. So I asked my department head if I could sign up for the mid-career faculty semester-long workshop led by Dr. Heather Wilkinson and Nancy Simpson. My department chair agreed, but was a little confused why I wanted to participate, since it would be more geared towards associate professor faculty working towards full. I signed up anyway, and my department chair was right. Other than one other person who had just come to A&M 2 years ago as a department head and now found himself as a member of that department trying to start a new research group, the rest of the participants were associate professors. That said, the group was a powerful group of movers and shakers and included the prestigious Dr. Julie Harlan, a prior speaker of the Faculty Senate, who is now an associate dean continuing to make significant impacts across the university. I will say to you that participating in that workshop during the spring of 2020 was one of the most life-changing experiences that I've had, and I will strongly recommend you to take that workshop or one of the myriad of other workshops led through the Office of Faculty Affairs by Dr. Heather Wilkinson. When we went around the room discussing why everybody was there, the answers were impressive, and I felt at a loss. When it got to my turn, I said, I wasn't really sure. From all external metrics, I was a successful full faculty member, but I wanted to do more, and I felt like I was capable of doing more, but I wasn't sure of exactly what that was. That workshop, as well as all of the other workshops led by Dr. Heather Wilkinson, included an intense amount of self-reflection. And from that reflection, I realized that what was missing for me was the impact that I wanted to make a bigger impact and impact service at the university. It was during that semester that I applied for and was later selected to be director of the Tees Tamu Institute for Engineering Education and Innovation. And I thrived in that role. I loved enhancing our research prominence and accomplishments in engineering education. We have become a powerhouse, one of the world's largest and most prominent engineering education researchers, and most prominently a powerhouse at the most prominent engineering education conference, ASEE. However, what has become the most favorite thing that I do in that role is mentor and even formally chair and advise other faculty members, many of whom are now close to receiving their own PhD in interdisciplinary education with a research focus on engineering education. However, also in this workshop, I was very inspired by my colleague, Dr. Julie Harlan, who is a prior Faculty Senate speaker. She was a colleague in the workshop, and through her inspiration, I decided to run for membership in the Faculty Senate. Throughout my career, I have been discouraged to participate in the Faculty Senate. I was told to focus on my research. But even with that advice over my tenure at TAMU, I couldn't help but advise over 1,000 undergraduate researchers in their own research projects, which many faculty had told me was also not a good use of my time in order for me to make the biggest research impact. But I couldn't help myself. Working with undergraduate researchers and seeing the impact on their careers has been incredibly meaningful to me. And despite the amount of time that I devoted to undergraduate research, I continue to be successful through traditional metrics that the university does. So I thought maybe the Faculty Senate would be no different. So I ran for Faculty Senate in the spring of 2020. And yes, that was the start of COVID time. However, with the many, many warnings that I had received, and knowing that I tend to overcommit, I chose the safest route I could to make sure I could participate fully in the Senate without overcommitting myself. I ran for seat number 19, a seat in engineering that for some reason, as the last seat on the ballot, had only a one-year term. Now I know more about these things. It was either given to someone stepping off early or given that it was the last slot, possibly due to a restructuring of the slots due to engineering's fastly climbing enrollment. So I ran for seat number 19 and I was elected. Now be sure to not think it was because anyone thought I was going to do a good job in that role. I ran unopposed, probably the only person who wanted to run for a one-year seat. I spent that first year on the Senate riveted, enjoying being able to participate from my living room chair during COVID. And it didn't seem to be an overwhelming amount of work. I was highly engaged in the research committee and the engineering caucus. That year, the chair of our research committee passed away, and Dr. Matt Sachs and I threw ourselves headfirst, not only in finishing up the committee and presenting our reports, but also in recommending our prior chair for the best first session senator award, which he ended up receiving posthumously. But one of the most important things about being on the Senate was that I really enjoyed engaging with my colleagues more than I ever had in the past. After that point about 15 years at A&M, I was finally starting to engage with colleagues across the university in an authentic and meaningful way. And I was really enjoying that. The faculty here are absolutely amazing. So I decided to run again on the same seat this year for a 3-year term. And I decided to throw my hat in the run for the executive committee. However, I signed up for the executive committee ballot a bit too quickly. And as I was quite inexperienced, thus when I found out that I was not only executive committee, but also elected to be secretary of the Faculty Senate, I was more than a bit confused. But upon looking things further, again, rest assured, it was not because that anyone thought I was going to do a good job, but rather because I had run unopposed. However, I am so grateful for that opportunity. That year as secretary, it was incredibly illuminating. I learned how much work the executive committee did behind the scenes for faculty, solving problems before they became problems. That was also the year that Dr. Kathy Banks became president. And it was also the year that our current speaker-elect, Dr. Patty Smith, stepped down because she became a department head. Congrats again, Patty. You're doing an amazing job. So given the turmoil, Speaker Dale Rice generously threw his name in the hat again to be the next speaker for year 2. So again, I am going to mention that this was the year that Dr. Kathy Banks became president. And what I'm going to say throughout this, some of it might be a bit controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. Dr. Kathy Banks is a brilliant woman, and I have worked with her for about 10 years in engineering. I was used to the massive changes that she sometimes enacted, and I also knew how to voice discontent with the changes so that she could hear and act appropriately to our suggestions. Clay played a huge role in that. He was the one who made sure the faculty voice was well represented in engineering. Many of you were surprised at how many engineering faculty came to the defense of NK when his character had been attacked at times. And I will tell you that it is because over and over again, over the last many years, he has proven to us repeatedly that he represented our voice fairly. But when Dr. Banks first became president, I was worried that a disaster might be imminent. She was not used to being the voice that spoke internally to the faculty, but rather she spoke externally. In my concern, I used to voice internally, oh, this might not end well. And I would say, she needs an NK to talk it internally to the faculty. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever guess that that NK that I mentioned that she needed would be the current NK Anand, but it did turn out to be. So as the MGT report rolled around and working groups were popping up, I feared the worst and that the university would break down because of extreme differences in expectations and methods in communication styles. And I thought strongly that we needed a full professor in engineering with a strong research profile who is respected by and respected Kathy to be the next Speaker of the Faculty Senate. Thus, I ran for that position. I ran for Speaker-elect of the Faculty Senate. And I'll pause for a moment to talk about Kathy. She, like all of us, is far from a perfect person. What happened last summer was horrible, and I don't excuse any of it. But I do want to mention a few things. First, that there are very few women in engineering, and a very, very small minority of them rise to engineering leadership positions. Still, I remember when she first arrived at Texas A&M, I believe she might be the only dean in history to make individual meetings with every single faculty member in the entire college upon her first arrival to get to know them and their research and their students and their lab. I still remember that first meeting with Kathy in my lab and my students. It was a long meeting. She spent a lot of time speaking with us, really engaging with us. She encouraged me to develop a center for my own sketch recognition research and has continued to be supportive of me throughout my career. And I have heard similar stories from other faculty members. I would also like to speak for a moment about ETAM and the rationale for the merging of the three colleges. ETAM stands for Entry to a Major, and it started in 2014. It meant that students could not choose their major upon entry, but rather it meant that students were admitted into general engineering, and that they got to choose their major only at the end of their first year, and they also had to qualify for their major. I'm a professor of computer science and engineering, and I will say that we were the fiercest opponents of ETAM. Initially, students were unable to take any computer science classes during their first year, causing huge bottlenecks in our degree. Our Hispanic student population went down from 22% in 2014 down to 11% a few years ago. They were being admitted at the same rate as they had previously, but they were now self-selecting out. For the earlier part of the years, students had, earlier part of the years of ETAM, students had to get a 3.5 to get into the major, but now they need a 3.75 for automatic entry, leaving only, I think most recently, 18 out of 600 students for holistic review. And let me tell you, it's a very hard decision to reject a student with a 3.74. But we have students in holistic review who have done amazing things, such as starting their own companies and many other things. I will also say that on the flip side, our retention went from the low 40s to the high 80s, approaching 90% retention. Across the college, the numbers are very similar. Our retention in engineering is orders above the national average, and all of the engineering departments have benefited from this in regards to their national rankings. Now, many of you have also wondered about the rationale behind the merger of the colleges. I know you may have guessed, surmised, and even read text message regarding the rationale behind the merging of the colleges. For me, being from engineering, the rationale always seemed immediately obvious. When students enter into a major from high school and don't succeed, it harms the department in terms of retention and ranking, and also in terms of resources. But most importantly, it harms the student. So Kathy, with her knowledge of where students usually transfer from and to, from my opinion, realized that if she could put those departments in the same college and create shared first-year programs for those students who transfer between programs, they would be much more likely to be successful. Again, from my opinion, this was the rationale not only for the merged colleges, but also the movement of departments to other colleges, as well as the multi-majors that shared a first year. I'm not sure if I have that term multi-merger correct exactly, but many of you know what I'm talking about. I was explaining this to one of my colleagues on a phone call one day. My husband overheard me while watering his plants. And he said, "That's genius. No one ever enters geography, his discipline, directly from high school," he said. "They always end up transferring from one of the programs in the College of Science." And now those two programs are now in the same college. And I will tell you that the university as a whole has already started to see incredible retention increases after these changes, and our retention numbers are far better than the national average across the university. That said, I am not a Pollyanna. I am fully aware of other things that have gone out through Kathy's tenure here at Texas A&M. And after the summer of 2023, it's easy to vilify someone and to forget all of the good things they have accomplished in the past. But I want people to remember that people are multifaceted. And I personally am a big fan of recognizing that cognitive dissonance is a thing that can make us stronger and more supportive of differences of thought and understanding how people are different. I personally think that as the world gets more and more complicated, we need to become more and more comfortable with cognitive dissonance and differences and diversity of thought. I mention this in part also because the investigative committee that I created because of the resolution that you all insisted on is done with their report. At this point, it is still going through a minor fact check. And at this point, it has only been reviewed by the EC and one or two staff members. So we're not exactly ready today to let it out, but we do plan to release it out to the full faculty and post on the Faculty Senate website as soon as it is ready. However, before we do that, I urge you to let us release it to the named persons in the document, not because I expect that we will change anything because of it, but to ensure that we are fair and that the document is accurate. They won't have the ability to themselves change anything, but they would have the ability to potentially provide additional documentation for any potentially inaccurate part of the document. I think it is in all of our best interest that the document is fair and accurate. So you're probably curious about the outcomes of the report. For the most part, they are what you expect. But there are two things I would like to point out. The first is that all evidence supports that Kathy was 100% supportive of Dr. McElroy's hire all the way up to 1 to 2 weeks before the deal went down. Second is that Dr. Anand had zero awareness of the final contracts, as he said during our July meeting. Those contracts were never formally submitted to the Office of the Faculty Affairs. Now, it is true that if he had suspected something, his office could have gone into Interfolio to look and find and examine unsubmitted documents from others in the chain. But that would have been unprecedented and also a violation of the common respect given to department heads and deans during the hiring processes. Okay, so back to the timeline. As speaker-elect, I tried to ask difficult questions. In December 2022, I asked President Beggs, what was NK's role? Did he represent the voice of the faculty? Did he represent the voice of the president? To which NK immediately responded that he was both, and which the president immediately corrected him to state that, no, in fact, he was the voice of the president. I spoke on behalf of myself regarding SB 17 and SB 18 in Austin in April of 2023 while speaker-elect, and I've shared with you on more than one occasion my own personal thoughts on the importance of DEI and how I define DEI personally, which does not involve hiring people for any reason other than merit, but does involve taking into account systemic and historical impact. And most importantly, to make sure that each and every one of our students are successful and that we help support their success. And I will emphasize again that we at TAMU have never let someone in for any reason other than merit in our hiring or student admission processes. Continuing on the timeline, there were more than a few bumps along the way, but as I mentioned earlier in this dialogue, by the time I became Speaker of the Faculty Senate, it seemed that the enormity of bumps had been solved, and we are on our way to a calm path forward. June was quite calm. So calm, in fact, that we decided to cancel the July meeting to give people some time to unwind during the summer to get ready for the new academic year. All of that changed when I was driving back from a trip to the ASWE conference and some time in New Jersey when I started to get call after call from people from the press about Dr. McElroy. I don't think I need to rehash the July meeting, but I will thank you all for being very faithful to your faculty constituents during that time. You were incredibly brave and voiced the concerns of your faculty in a wonderful way. I don't want to give a lot of extra details, but I will also say that I worked closely during that time with Susan Balabina, Dr. Hart Blanton, and even Dr. Jose Bermuda to ensure fair treatment to all, including President Banks. Thank you all for your support. That same summer, details about Dr. Joy Alonso surfaced from her treatment during the previous March. I spoke to her on many occasions since that time and have had many personal discussions with Dr. Alonso, mainly in trying to get to know her and her research and making sure that the process is much better going forward. She is a brilliant researcher and an amazing person. That was a hard time for us, but some amazing things came out of that summer. I believe one of the most important thing that came out of that was the impact on our policies, or SAPs as we call them. Specifically those SAPs relating to academic freedom. Dr. Heather Lynch and the Office of Faculty Affairs has been stupendous in their efforts to support and create change in this area. There have been a number of senators and faculty members that have made significant efforts to make these changes. And those changes have been enacted in our new policies that are much, much stronger and protect both faculty and librarians for their academic freedom. Thank you all for your efforts. We have a record number of difficulties that have gone through this year, with one of the most significant being the closure of the Qatar campus. As many of you know, I've been meeting the faculty there weekly since the closure. Additionally, I traveled to Qatar this month and have met all the wonderful faculty there. The Qatar faculty should be incredibly proud of what they created over the last 22 years there. It is an amazing campus with outstanding students, outstanding faculty. There is so much for them to be proud of. I certainly am. One item that has brought us new hope to the university has been the appointment of a new president of the university. President Welsh has shown incredible support for shared governance. He has created a number of committees that have strong and legitimate involvement with vocal faculty. The president has involved me personally in a number of committees, including the president's cabinet. The Speaker of the Faculty Senate has not been a member of the president's cabinet in many, many years. It was President Gates who first started the tradition to involve the Speaker of the Faculty Senate in the president's cabinet, but the tradition was lost several years later. The president has also engaged me and other faculty in several influential committees that include deans, vice presidents, and other senior administrators. The president has not only paid lip service to the importance of shared governance, but also has made new impactful actions that demonstrate his full commitment to shared governance. I encourage all of you to step up to these new opportunities and continue to make sure that our voices are heard and responded to legitimately. We need to make sure that we as faculty play our appropriate roles in shared governance. At this point, I think it's important to repeat that shared governance does not mean the faculty necessarily get a vote in the process. Rather, it means that our voice will be heard and that the actions will reflect that our voice has been provided a significant consideration. As I leave this position, I ask you, the faculty and and senators, for a number of things. I ask that you continue to be brave and vocal in this coming year and the years beyond, and support your constituents. I also encourage you to be authentic. And most importantly, actually, just as Adam mentioned earlier, it is important for you to be kind to yourself and others. We are all imperfect. Be kind to yourselves and others through the many more challenges that are certain to come forward. I also urge you to respect the diversity of thought that your colleagues and community members bring to the table. We learn so much from the differences that we each possess. I personally learn so much more from those whom I might disagree with than from those who think similarly to me. As the world becomes more and more divisive, please continue to stretch your own thoughts and beliefs and work to understand those who might differ from you. Okay, with that, I will complete my talk with one more earnest comment. Thank you so much for your support and help over this year. It has been an extreme pleasure working with all of you. I will continue to support you all as best as I can in whatever role I have in the future. This has been a very difficult and trying year, but one that I will treasure forever. It will forever be one of my most meaningful years in my life. So thank you so much for everything. At this point, my speakership ends, and I will pass the gavel to the new Speaker of the Faculty Senate, Angie Hill-Price, Dr. Angie Hill-Price. Thank you all sincerely for everything.
Congratulations, former Speaker Hammond.